Welcome to the deep dive. Today we've gathered a stack of sources that tell this incredible story. It's about biology moving from just observation to, well, to engineering.
Right. We're moving past merely reading the book of life, the genome.
We're actively writing it
Yeah.
and editing it. And the ultimate co-pilot in all of this is generative AI.
That's the mission today. For decades, synthetic biology, or SynBio, has had this dream of treating life like a systematic engineering project.
Applying predictable, standardized principles to these incredibly complex biological tasks.
Exactly.
And we're not just talking about like fiddling with an existing metabolic pathway anymore. This is designing completely novel organisms to do specific jobs.
Things like engineering microbiomes to replace industrial fertilizers, or using gene drives to wipe out malaria-carrying mosquitoes.
That whole field has just exploded, right?
Oh, yeah.
Thanks to things like high-throughput sequencing and CRISPR.
Oh, absolutely. The investment has been massive. We're talking around $12 billion just between 2009 and 2018. But the convergence happening now with generative AI, that's what's creating true industrial scale.
So if SynBio gives us the blueprint, the ambitious plan for a living machine, then GenAI is the compiler. It's the thing that turns the plan into working code.
And that's our focus, the specific AI models, how they actually work, and, the surprising dual-use risks that come with them.
You're about to get a shortcut to understanding what might be the next major frontier in science.
So to really get AI's impact, you have to look at the process. In synthetic biology, everything follows what's called the DBTL cycle.
Design, build, test, and learn. Okay, so in that whole sequence, what was the money-burning bottleneck?
It was always the transition from learn back to design.
Why there?
Because biological systems are just horrifically complex. I mean, they're context dependent, they're constantly evolving, mutating, the rules are messy.
So you'd spend months building and testing a new strain, you get all this data.
And then you have to guess what to change next. And it was often just that, a guess. An educated guess, but still a trial and error loop that made R&D incredibly expensive.
Okay, so the learn phase gives us the data. Design needs guidance. This is where AI steps in. The sources highlight this amazing case study called ART.
The automated recommendation tool.
What does ART do exactly?
It's a machine learning framework. It's built specifically to optimize microbial strains for making things like biofuels or fatty alcohols. The goal is always to maximize what they call TR.
Titer, rate, and yield.
Titer, rate, and yield. It steps in right after the test phase to make sure the next design is the most promising one possible.
The mechanics here are, well, they're a little jargon heavy, so let's break it down. We read that it doesn't just use one model, it uses an ensemble approach. What does that mean?
That's the brilliant part. So imagine you have a panel of, say, 10 different experts. These are your levels mole models, things like random forest, neural networks, the standard stuff from libraries like scikit-learn. Each one of them looks at the experimental data and spits out a prediction for the next best design.
But any one of those individual models could be wrong, right?
Yep.
Especially when you have sparse, expensive biological data.
Exactly. So RT builds what's called a level 1 Bayesian ensemble model on top of them.
And that level 1 model isn't just averaging their opinions.
No, it's smarter than that. It's a consensus builder. It weighs the predictions from those level 0 experts based on how well they did in the previous cycles. If expert A has been right 80% of the time, its vote counts for a lot more than expert B, who's only been right 40% of the time.
So why go through all that complexity? Why not just find the one best expert and just run with its predictions?
Because the goal isn't just to get the best answer, it's to understand how much you can trust that answer. The ensemble lets RT quantify its own uncertainty. So it doesn't give you a single number like design X will yield 1.5 grams. It gives you a full probability distribution.
So if the curve is wide and flat, the model is basically saying, I have no idea.
I have low confidence, don't waste your money here. But if it's narrow and tall, you know the recommendation is reliable, even if the absolute number isn't perfectly accurate.
That makes so much sense. Because the data is the most expensive part. And the performance insight you found was also interesting. It's not an instant fix.
Right. Most of these projects stop after 2 cycles because of cost. But RT showed you really need 5 to 10 cycles for the AI to learn enough to be truly efficient. It's an investment, but it pays off.
So if RT is about fixing the design loop, the next wave of GenAI is. It's about learning the fundamental grammar of life itself.
That's the paradigm shift. Treating biological sequences, DNA, RNA, proteins, as a language you can read and write.
And the scale is just Mind-boggling. The most famous example here is probably AlphaFold 2.
Definitely. It basically solved the protein folding problem back in 2021. It can predict a protein's 3D structure just from its amino acid sequence with near experimental accuracy.
And a huge part of its breakthrough was using multiple sequence alignment, or MSA. Can you just explain that in simple terms?
Absolutely. Think of it like this. You're comparing the same gene sequence across thousands of different species, from bacteria all the way to humans.
Okay.
The parts of that code that nature has kept the same for millions of years, those are almost certainly critical for the protein's structure and function. AF2 uses that evolutionary context to figure out how it's all going to fold up.
But digging through all that evolutionary history, that takes a lot of time and computing power. What if I need speed?
Then you look at models like ESM-Fold. It's about 6 times faster than a single AF2 model.
And it's faster because it skips the MSA step entirely.
Right, it predicts structure from just a single sequence. And it does that by using just a gargantuan 15 billion parameter model.
But wait, if ESM-Fold is trained using distillation from AlphaFold 2, meaning it learns from AlphaFold's predictions, aren't you? Aren't you risking training the model on AlphaFold's own mistakes?
That's an excellent point. I mean, that is the key tension in the field right now.
You could end up with this sort of synthetic consensus that just drifts away from biological reality.
You could. You are inheriting the biases of the source model, no question. But the sheer size of ESM-Fold's model and the amount of data it sees means it can still capture these underlying relationships really, really effectively. It's a trade-off for speed and scale with ESM-Fold versus maximum accuracy with AF2.
And both are pushing us toward generating totally novel proteins, things nature has never seen.
With tools like ProGen, Protein MPNN, and RF diffusion, yes, we're moving beyond observation into creation.
And this language of life idea goes right down to the DNA itself with the open source model Evo2. The scale of the training data here is just almost impossible to grasp.
It is astronomical. Evo2 was trained on nearly 9 trillion nucleotides.
9 trillion.
To put that in perspective, that's basically all known living species, prokaryotes, eukaryotes, humans, plants, animals, even some extinct ones. And just like ChatGPT, you give it a DNA prompt and it auto-completes the code. It literally writes new genetic material.
What I found most incredible about Evo2 wasn't just the data volume, it was the context window. 1 million nucleotides. Why is that specific number so vital?
That context window is like the model's short-term memory. A human might hold a sentence in their mind, but Evo2 can hold 1 million units of code.
Okay.
In biology, a lot of genes are controlled by other pieces of DNA that are physically very far away on the strand. A small model would miss that. But with 1 million nucleotide window, Evo2 can spot those complex, long-distance regulatory loops.
So it's connecting the dots across a whole chapter of the book, not just a few words.
Yeah.
And what's the immediate application for that predictive power?
Clinically, the big hope is that it can become the ultimate filter for genetic variation. It can help tell the difference between a harmless mutation and one that's likely to cause disease.
And they were careful about safety, right?
Very. They deliberately excluded all viral genomes from the training data, specifically to prevent misuse.
That sets us up perfectly for how this is all translating into the real world. This isn't just theory anymore.
No, we're seeing rapid industrial adoption. RT, for example, is already being used to improve renewable biofuel production. But let's look at a really high-value compound, lycopene.
The red pigment and antioxidant.
Hugely valuable. And companies are racing to bioengineer microbes to make it.
And the research you found on the yeast Yerewia lipolytica is a perfect example of this in action.
It's a masterclass. They systematically tweaked its metabolism. They enhanced phospholipid biosynthesis and, critically, changed the carbon source it was being fed.
What did they feed it?
Short-chain fatty acids, acetate, and butyrate. This basically jump-started a more efficient pathway to the precursor molecule, and the result was yields of up to 463 milligrams per gram. That's a huge number, comparable to what you'd get in a massive optimized bioreactor.
Just staggering efficiency. Now let's connect that to the circular economy and this huge problem of mixed plastic waste.
This is a breakthrough from the J. Craig Venter Institute. Mixed plastics are the bottleneck in recycling. They're expensive to sort and hard to process.
So what did the JCVI team do?
It's so elegant. It's a 2-part process. First, a non-toxic chemical pretreatment breaks down the mixed plastic into smaller organic molecules they call oxygenates.
Okay, so you've got a chemical soup.
A complex chemical soup. And then a team of microbial specialists steps in to eat it.
A team.
A consortium. a partnership of two engineered species. They use Rhodococcus josti to break down the aromatic compounds, and Acinetobacter baelia to handle the aliphatic acids.
A division of labor.
Exactly. It lets the system robustly consume everything in that complex waste stream. The AI helps design these specialist strains, turning what was a costly liability into a high-value industrial feedstock.
We're seeing the same kind of acceleration in pharma with platforms like Cradle.
Cradle is a big one. It's used by major players, IFF, Johnson & Johnson, Novo Nordisk. Their whole value is iterative AI. The models learn from every single round of wet lab data their clients upload.
And that speeds things up. How much?
Anywhere from 1.5 to 12 times faster.
What's the AI actually doing?
It's generating candidates like antibodies or peptides that are optimized across multiple criteria at the same time.
So not just effectiveness.
Right. You need effectiveness, but also stability, low toxicity, and manufacturability. The AI optimizes for all of those at once, which just slashes the number of testing rounds you need to do.
And these AI-designed molecules are now actually reaching human trials.
They are. We've hit major clinical milestones. Exscientia's DSP-11181 was the first AI-designed drug candidate to enter clinical trials for OCD. And in silico medicine's drug for idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis just got orphan drug designation from the FDA.
So this is real. It's happening.
It proves that GenAI isn't just optimizing, it's identifying totally novel, viable drugs faster than humans could alone.
Which brings us inevitably to the final crucial section. Biosecurity and the dual-use dilemma. The same tools that cure can also harm.
That's the irreducible threat. GenAI dramatically lowers the knowledge barrier for misuse. You don't need years of lab experience anymore to design a novel toxin or a viral protein.
And the sources point out a really critical governance gap. Our safeguards have historically been focused in the wrong place.
They've been focused on the point of synthesis. When you actually go to order a physical strand of DNA from a supplier, that used to be the choke point.
But that's not the choke point anymore.
Not at all. GenAI lets you design the dangerous sequence long before you ever order anything. It's like focusing all your security on the printing press when the threat has moved to the design software itself.
So security has to be baked into the tools.
Yeah.
A secure-by-design approach. What are the guardrails people are advocating for?
There are 5 key layers. First is simple input-output screening. The model flags or just blocks risky prompts like someone asking it to design a toxin.
Okay, that's the obvious one.
Second is dataset filtering. This is preventative. You screen the training data itself to make sure the model never learns how to make dangerous things in the first place. That's exactly why Evo2's creators left out viral genomes.
Right. Don't teach it the dangerous language.
Right.
But once something is generated, how do you track it?
That's layer 3, watermarking. You embed a traceable cryptographic signature into the synthetic DNA sequence itself. In theory, it creates an audit trail back to the model that made it.
But hold on, if I'm a sophisticated, determined actor, can I just remove that watermark? Is it really a secure defense?
It's more of a forensic tool and a deterrent than a perfect defense. You're right. A skilled user might be able to circumvent it.
So it's a speed bump, not a wall.
A speed bump, exactly. Which is why you need the 4th layer, safety alignment. This is where you use techniques like reinforcement learning with human feedback to train the model to adhere to ethical standards, to make it actively resist complying with dangerous requests.
So you're training it to have its own internal safety compass.
That's a good way to put it. And the 5th and final layer is anti-jailbreak screening defenses to stop people from using clever prompts to trick the AI into bypassing all the other filters.
Taken together, it's a monumental shift. From reactive oversight to proactive security that's baked right into the technology.
It has to be.
So we've gone from years of trial and error to automated probabilistic design in just a few years, all driven by these models that are learning to speak the language of life.
That really is the central theme. GenAI is shifting biology from this mechanistic hypothesis-driven science, where we had to know every single why, to an experience-based probabilistic engineering discipline where we just need to know how to make it work.
And that, I think, raises a really profound final question for you to consider. If the AI hands you a protein that works perfectly, that gets your drug to market 12 times faster, do you still need to spend years figuring out the deep mechanistic why behind it?
Or will biologists slowly start to embrace the powerful black box, accepting high utility, maybe, in exchange for complete understanding?
It's that classic tension between fundamental science and pure utility. For these incredibly complex systems, maybe pattern recognition is the only way forward to solve huge problems like climate change or pandemics.
But that search for the why? I mean, that's the essence of discovery.
Mm.
The future of science might just depend on finding the perfect balance between the power of the black box and our relentless need to understand.